Hi everyone. So in this particular assignment, what we're doing is taking one of our palettes from the previous exercise, either the triad or the tetrad, your choice, and we're taking the colors from that palette and we are starting to try to connect color to a kind of specific intention for how what we want the colors to express, you know. So in the previous exercise you chose a keyword, any type of keyword, and what you're doing now is you're sort of seeing how you can match the keyword, whatever that keyword was. There was a lot of really interesting ones: nature, um, let's see some of the words here we have. um, they're a little too small for me to read on the Lightroom, but I think there was fresh, maybe sweet, sorrow, all kinds of interesting terms. And so those colors were starting to express that. And then what did, or what you were wanting to do, is when you turned it into a design, is to just think about how you could make the design reflect that term as well. Kind of like put them together, you know, the colors, the ideas, and the composition. And that's it. So in a way, we're just really just taking our, our use of color, our application of color to the next level, like the kind of level that you would, you'd use out there in any type of real world application, whatever that might be. Um, in your design work or when you're creating an artwork, if you have a specific intention in mind, you're going to think about how the colors express that, which is something I think most people already do start thinking about. So this is just a way of really applying that. Um, One thing I want to say, so we're going to be doing the same thing for milestone 5. Uh, and what I want to say too here, just as since we're in a group critique environment, so I can lay the stage for what we're doing next week, is do feel like that you do not necessarily have to make a design that literally shows your idea. Do you know what I mean? Like it can be like we're seeing some really interesting abstract ideas here, um, which I think can be, or some sort of semi-abstract, like they're not quite realistic, they're not quite abstract, they're in between. It's really, I think, good to stick on those sides of things, the kind of more abstract or the semi-abstract. Um, First of all, I just think it's probably easier to do that in a design software. But what you're also doing is you're just letting the colors and the shapes themselves express the meaning, um, if that makes sense. Like using a curving shape always gives you a sort of a round, kind of a gentler feeling. And, geometric shapes can be a little bit more hard edged and modern. But there's all kinds of things you can do with shapes and designs to kind of express the meaning, without it having to look like anything in particular. So don't hesitate to continue to do that. That's just fine in this class. Um, and I think yeah, I think that's all I really wanted to say at this point. So let's just get into it. Okay, I just realized I was using my headset mic, and I don't think it's quite as good as my laptop mic. So I just changed that out so the sound might sound a little bit different. Um, and that's why. Okay, Ebony, so you had the term sorrow, and your palette was these um, very sort of muted, darker colors, which I think was a really great choice. And also, you had a lot of blue in your palette. And when we think of blue, we do tend to think of, blue relating to sorrow or sadness or depression or introversion. I'm feeling blue, something that we even have a phrase for it. And I think your design also really emphasized that with, it's sort of really kind of gentle and also not so gentle, sort of a dramatic way too. We have like the sad sort of droplets in the background, but we also have this little lightning bolt, which I think is a really cool element you have in there, which sort of shows that sometimes sorrow is caused by, something unexpected. And then you also have some of these darker hues in the background, and then these red diagonal. I like the composition. You have the interesting sort of melding of like rounded shapes in the background, but then a lot of emphasis on the diagonal line, which I think is what helps unify it. Is the repeating drops, and then the repeating diagonals. I think that's a really, repetition is really what brings all designs together. Repetition of shape and also repetition of color. That's one of the reasons why we're working so much on these color harmonies, is because they actually create a sense of harmony. Like if you limit the number of colors in your design, whatever that design may be, your design will be more united. It's one of the main ways that we create a design that's very cohesive. So that's one of the powerful things about working with harmonies. Okay, so yeah, overall, I think this looks really good. And what do you think? So when I looked at the this, one of the things I was thinking about is how maybe it feels like you could add a little contrast into your design, especially maybe with the lightning bolt, like something to just kind of bring parts out. Like I do like the idea of keeping it darker overall. Sometimes though, when everything is like at the same or getting closer to the same value, then things tend to merge. Like we sort of looked at that in, I guess, last week when we looked at low contrast and high contrast parts of a design. So what you might want to do is add a little more high contrast to your design, maybe just in one area or a few areas. But one area I was looking at is just maybe the lightning bolt. Like I noticed that maybe this color in here is a little lighter from your palette, so you could maybe take this color and put it in to your palette, you know. Maybe I can do that here in Photoshop. Sometimes Photoshop allows you to sort of do these kinds of on-the-fly editing, sometimes not. That might be a bit too bright, because now we've got maybe a little too much contrast. So you could go in here and maybe like, go with sort of like maybe in between, something just maybe a little bit darker or a little bit more contrast. Now, one of the things the assignment says is that you should just use these 16 colors. I'm not going to be too particular about that, really, to be honest, so if you have like a few that are not in there. But one way to solve that, if you don't like one of the colors in here, it's not quite working for you in terms of, like, let's say you've got a yellow in your tetrad or your triad, and you think you need to take that yellow, and this is just for everybody. If you find that there's a certain color that you really need, that you started with this yellow and you think, hey, I think it needs to be lighter or darker or more toned out or whatever it needs to be, feel free to go back into your color palette and change the palette itself. Do you know what I mean? That's what a designer would do. If we created a palette and we started working on the design and we needed to tweak that, we would want to keep it within the triad or tetrad, so you don't want to add another hue, but you can certainly change the swatches. Do you know what I mean? To make it work for your purposes. So that's what I would do here, is just maybe add a little more contrast. Kind of feel like maybe this little orangey droplet doesn't quite fit in to the rest of the design. I might just take that out. It kind of feels like maybe all the droplets should be blue. So, I might so that's what I would do here. I might just play a little bit more, just tiny bits more in the contrast. Maybe this, I'm looking at the lightning bolt, maybe even a little bit more in other places. Just touch it up a little bit, get a little bit lighter or brighter colors. But again, you can do some very subtle things here, and that will be enough. Okay, nice job. Okay, Cassie. Yeah, I think overall I agree with you that your shape here, your repeating shape, really matches nicely your idea of sweet and sour. Kind of gives us this sort of fun. It's like a pinwheel. Maybe it's a pinwheel, maybe it's a candy, or it's certainly like a fun shape because it has a lot of movement, and it's sort of, I think, just exemplifies your idea. And I also like the diagonal background. This is something that I think is a really good thing to do, is to do something in the background that what we call activates the space, which is something that Ebony did as well, and can be something very simple, and then you can lay over your other elements on top. And I also love the idea of just the repetition here. So you've got the simple diagonal in the background, and then you have the pinwheel that's repeating, which is really great. So I think that's, those are your two main elements, your design strategy. So I don't have a lot to suggest here. I think the only thing I might suggest is one thing you might try is making your background even maybe a little darker than you have. Even like this is a nice dark color. These are starting to get a little darker so that your pinwheels sort of float on top a little bit more. So you could experiment with that. Maybe just use some of these darker colors back there and see how that goes. And then the other thing, I would just kind of keep experimenting with the placement of the shapes. I like the fact that you're using diminishing sizes and overlapping, but just kind of keep experimenting. When you work with what's called an asymmetrical design or an informal design, it's actually one of those, it's a weird kind of conundrum. Like when we have a symmetrical design where everything's like a grid or, like a pattern, all you need to do is sort of make sure it's really, really kind of well crafted. But it sort of, it balances itself, it resolves itself because it's so symmetrical. Do you know what I mean? Everything has its own place. When you work with an asymmetrical design, you often have to kind of just really play around with it and like move things around until it feels like, as we say in design, nothing can be added and nothing can be taken away. And it's almost like it's like this, it's sort of a feeling like it with asymmetrical designs, there's a feeling that it randomly happened, and yet it looks like just perfect randomness, if that makes sense. So again, experimenting. I like what you're doing here, like pulling things off the edge. That's good. Sometimes it helps to have like to work with a few big shapes, which you're starting to do here. Maybe even work with a few more bigger shapes. Thinking about how like maybe some areas could be like, maybe some areas could have a little bit of a sort of a pattern to them. Like you could maybe take one and sort of have a little bit of a small pattern that you repeat, and then some of it's more random or asymmetric. So I would just keep experimenting, until it feels like it's what we say, it's like feels just like it has come together. Okay, Deidreona. So yes, so you have beauty as your design idea, and colors are sort of this, I think it was your 1, 2, 3, 4, your tetrad. And so yeah, I really like these shapes. I do think they exemplify beauty in the sense of these kind of elegant, sort of smooth, rounded shapes, and I really like your grid on top as well. It sort of breaks it up a little bit in terms of the space. So what I would say here is just make sure to go and take a look at my feedback for the previous exercise. You want to make sure that you're working with more tints, tones and shades, value and saturation of your palette. You want to have 16 colors that are all different. So again, take a look at my feedback there, and then just apply it into your design a little bit more. So it looks like you're adding black and white here, so that would not be part of your palette as it exists now, and it's always good to avoid black and white. So maybe, maybe this color in here could be, again, one of the new colors you add into your design. So I would keep experimenting with the color and with the design. Yeah, one thing I would say is sometimes working with ovals can be a little bit challenging. I tend to think that working with circles is a little bit easier because ovals can look like they're wanting to be circles. So I might make these all circles. I think your ovals, actually, the way you've done them is looking pretty good. But I might experiment with that a little bit more. Maybe add a few more circles to your design. Like something that could be really cute in your design, I think, is like using circles within circles. So you could add like another circle in here. So that you could like kind of like place maybe of your palette like a circle within a circle, maybe a circle within a circle within a circle. Do you know what I mean? It can really, I think you have a lot of opportunity here to really have a lot of fun within what you have done. Okay, so keep experimenting with this, and do check out my feedback for the previous exercise. Hi, Sora. Yeah, pattern and design. It is I think kind of like a combination of, first of all, you're right, knowing the tools a little bit, and then just kind of like there's a few different, you could say, like formulas in a way for creating a good design. And if you don't mind, I thought maybe we talk a little bit about them here, and when we look at your design, I'll give you maybe some suggestions for how to work with it. So first of all, so you're under the sea. I think that worked out really well. I like the idea of having, like in your case, a gradient background because it indicates the water very nicely. Automatically, it's almost like anything we put on top of your design already starts to look a bit watery. But then you've added these shapes. I love the kind of circular droplets and the kind of changes in color you have, and also the really simple shapes in here you have. I really love, this is such a cute, well, they're all really cute shapes, but this one, the little fishy, the starfish, they're all really nice. So what I would say in your design is I think you have, the kind of you've definitely translated your colors and your term into um, a design that reflects that. And I think all you want to do at this point is just work a little bit more on the composition itself. Some of the things I think you could work on first of all is maybe the sense of unity. And again, unity is really created by repetition, so we already have the repetition of the colors. But I would say you may have maybe a few too many shapes. That's, there is no limit to how many shapes you can use, but in general, I think it's always good when you're starting a design to work with limited shapes. And so I love these bubbles. I think those are really great. They're going to work really well in your design. And then maybe pick one of these other shapes to just use and repeat. Like that, I mean, again, this is so cute, and I really like this one too. I could almost see just working with maybe, I don't know, the stars and the circles look good together. These look good together. This one, oh, that's the same as this one. Yeah, so maybe work with that. Okay, and these are all the other shapes are super cute too. But again, sometimes it's really good to just maybe just the fish or the circles and the circles. So anyhow, so okay, so what are the ways that you can start working with a composition? It can be very challenging when you have like this, empty space and you're like, what am I going to do in the space? How can I bring it all together? I think that's something everybody shares. And so there's this file that I actually posted it to my very first post to this thread. It's a PDF if you want it, if anybody wants to download it. I think it just goes over some of the main kind of like strategies for creating a good composition no matter what you're working on. And this is the quotation: a designer knows he has achieved perfection, not when there is, he or she, not when there is nothing left to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. So that's always our ideal, isn't it? We always try to aim for something that looks like it's complete. And so these are not hard and fast rules. These are just, guidelines. The first one is, I talked about this a little bit before about activating the space when I talked about Ebony's design and Cassie's design, how you can see that even though this particular star is really super cool, like it's actually very unified with the repetition, but there's a sense that this background space feels, a little bit empty. Do you know what I mean? And so sometimes activating the space in the background in simple ways, you want to keep it kind of simple, really can change like you can go, so from this design, you can go from here to suddenly on the right-hand side is much more dynamic and complete feeling, even though not much has been added, but you can really see the difference here. So for your design, you actually have activated the background through the gradient. So maybe you don't have to do too much more, but maybe if you wanted to, you could sort of think about what could I do here to activate it a little bit more. Like maybe you could, I'm not sure, maybe you could have really big, like make the circles really big, or maybe you could have little kinds of like levels here of like stripes. I can sort of almost see horizontal stripes in the background with gradients on them. Or maybe you could leave that for now since it feels pretty active, it feels activated. Maybe you could work on the, these foreground elements a little bit more, and leave that later and see if you even need to do that. Cropping. So I actually think I think your design actually has some cropping on it, but you could do maybe a little bit more. Cropping is something that you can see. So cropping just means that you're pulling things off the edge of the page. And again, you can see this design up here, which I think is also a really pretty cool design and is working really well. And you'll notice here, okay, so remember I talked a little bit before about working with ovals and how hard they can be. There's a trick to working with ovals, which is to make sure that the ovals are approximately the same kind of oval, in terms of how squished they are. That actually, because then you're uniting it and it looks very intentional, and also going in the same direction. So these are all horizontal in direction. So that can actually create a really good design. Anyhow, but back to cropping. Notice how in the after design that everything has been pulled off the page, so that now we get a sense of the space is just a lot more interesting, by not sort of having it just come up to the edge and be, not coming over. The other thing I think also in your design, there's something that I don't think these particular design tips mention, but something that I think your design, really a lot of designs really can benefit from, is something called contrast in terms of the size. And you'll notice here how there's big shapes and little shapes. There's also some medium shapes, but notice how the shapes get really big, and then there's some that are quite a bit smaller. And this contrast, I think, really is a very good thing to have in design. So, it's what we did before with diminishing sizes, except without necessarily making it about depth. But that having the big and the smaller ones, I can easily see you doing that here, playing with the size. You'll notice automatically your design will come to life, when you do that. Okay, so cropping and contrast. Okay, this is actually something that I think is a really good trick, and I didn't learn this. A lot of these tricks, I feel like they weren't necessarily emphasized that much when I went to school, and I wish they had been, because they really do help a lot. This one in particular, unity. You can see here unity, again, we're creating unity with color, but unity with shape is also so important. And so, as this slide says, avoid using too many disparate shapes and elements. Rather than adding variety by adding different shapes, add variety by adding different sized shapes. Okay, so like I just said before, big and small. So in this one, you can see there's really only now 2 shapes here in this design, as compared to how many are here now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Whoa, there's a lot. 7. Yeah. And now there's 2. And still, this design still has a lot of interest and variety because of that sense of, there's overlapping, there's bigger and smaller shapes, but yet it's very united. So that is something that you could do here in your design as well, is create a sense of unity, just like I mentioned before, by picking maybe 2 shapes. I always think go for a smaller amount, 1 or 2. And, if you feel it doesn't quite work for what you're wanting to do, you can always add some later, but it's good to start out small and see how it goes and establish your design. And then this side, of course, could be a lot stronger if it was cropped. You notice this design is not cropped, in the sense like it's just coming to it's not coming to the edges here. So that would be something additional you could do with this design, based on what we just talked about. And so I'm going to, actually these next slides, I'm going to skip these slides. Well, shall I? Yeah, I think I'm going to skip these slides. I don't think they really are as important as these first ones. So again, I have this PDF. I just placed it in the discussion in the first post reply. So you can take a look at it and hold on to it. And I think I think it's just can really help you quickly grow in your design knowledge just with these few tips, and hopefully they'll help other folks too. All right, so yeah, just keep experimenting with this. And I think I've mentioned this in a previous critique. Save this if this is a PSD or an AI, whatever file it is. Hold on to it make another copy, just by renaming it at the top. You can call it like version 1, wherever you want, add to it, and then just go through and just like have fun and play and experiment with it, and then save it, open it again, resave it to with a new file name, so that you can just quickly motor through a number of versions of your design. And then you can, at the end of your session, you can go back and go through all the different designs one by one and say, okay, that one's working. Or it's a lot easier than just having one single file that you rework, because that way you tend to get a little bit more kind of like concerned about how the design is going. When you let things go and have all of these multiple drafts, you can really, I think, just have fun and let your creativity flow. Oh, and one other thing I do want to say here too. I know I've talked a lot here about your work, but just some other tips too. If you want to make a pattern with this, rather than making it asymmetrical, feel free to do that. I could easily see you take this little star shape and pop it into this little circle here. So you maybe like have a little bit of a unit, and then you could start repeating that, making a grid. You can use like guidelines to help you make a grid. I can pull over a guideline here, to help me like line things up. You can line things up, create a cute little pattern if you want, or you can work asymmetrically. So, feel free to just go with whatever you want. Okay, Bianca. Yeah, definitely. I really feel that this is playful. I really love these little kind of patterns of circles you have here that's sort of just flowing through. I think that's a really nice way to work with it. And, I think your colors are definitely having that playful sense in your design. Okay, so what I might suggest for your design is to keep, first of all, working a little bit more with where you place the color. For instance, the background, you may want to work with the background with maybe a slightly more sort of subdued background. What is subdued? It could be like one of these cooler colors in here. And a darker, a cooler, or more muted color. That will what we call send your background backwards. It's really just what we did back in Milestone. Oh, I'm forgetting now. Was it 2 where we worked with depth? Maybe it was 3. But what it does is it will really help to allow the foreground to come forward, and that will, I think, create a stronger design. So actually, I'm just going to so there's one of your colors here. And can you see how now the background is going backward? Okay, and then the other thing is really very similar to what we just talked about with Sora, which is that you have a lot of different shapes here. Well, not a lot, but you have like the dots, this shape in here, and then the swirls. So I might consider maybe taking one out. Like I actually might consider taking this one out, this one right here, these spirals, because they feel maybe a bit light in your design. Or keep this and maybe take out this particular shape, but kind of maybe play around with that, with the unity, and also maybe the cropping, maybe crop things a little bit more, maybe sizes. I love how you've made these dots a little bigger here. I might even experiment with bigger dots than that. So I would keep experimenting, and thinking about how you can maybe pull. Oftentimes, how we can unify a design is to have different parts of the design kind of go through, like be repeated in different parts. So I would, like if I took these spirals out, what I would do is I would put the dots down here to kind of blend, like move the dots throughout the design, or if I kept the spirals, I'd also move some spirals up here, so that instead of having these, like, because right now it looks like there's like a design here, there's a design here, and then there's a design here, like 3 kind of different designs, and you're starting to merge them, but I could see you doing that a little bit more. So I would just keep experimenting with this a little bit more, really experiment with it. Think about how you can, create a little bit more of a sense of contrast with the sizes, a little bit more unity, And let's just go back here with that color. I kind of do like this brighter color, so I muted the background with that blue, but I could also see maybe adding more bright color in the foreground. Once you make the dots a little bit bigger, I could also maybe see using like this kind of more muted yellow. Maybe that would kind of you know send the background back a little bit more. In general, warm colors, saturated colors, as we learned, lighter colors always come forward. And so it's good when you're working with your background to have it recede a little bit. And then place the brighter, more saturated lighter colors in the foreground. Okay, so keep experimenting with this. Okay, Eliza, all right, life. So you have um, this is your term, and you're working a lot with these kind of earthier colors with the greens and such. Yeah, I like what you've done here with placing this cooler muted background in the back. That's great in the background. It's really a very good example of how to create a background. And I also like these stripes and how you're putting in these kind of ideas of life for each of them into a pattern, which is great. I think it's a great idea. So the one thing I want to say about your shapes is you do want to make sure with your shapes that you're creating the shapes. If they're not a very basic shape like a geometric shape, like the shapes that we see here, the rectangle, the circle, polygon, the star shape is okay too. But beyond those, you really do want to be creating the shapes yourself rather than using the clip art shapes within the software. And I don't think our instructions are that clear about it, although the tutorials do show you how to work with the pen tool. But that's what I would recommend just in terms of taking your design to the next level and making it a little more creative and unique is to do that. So for example, if you want to work with a flower, for example, you could just build a flower from a geometric shape, like any type of maybe um, like a circle shape, or you could build I think the instructions, the tutorials show you how to create petals with the pen tool, so you could build that, or you could just work with abstract shapes if you don't want to build literal objects. And there again, like I mentioned in my introduction, there's no need to do that in this class. So if you want to just work with something like circles or squares or triangles, or whatever kind of geometric shape you want, and let the idea of life come through the color choices, that's fine. That's totally fine to do in this class. There's no need for you to necessarily build something that is like a literal representation of an object. So you can continue to make something if you want to just do a simple pattern with maybe even stripes. I'm totally okay with that. So the main thing is that you are like building your design from either the basic geometric shapes or creating them with the tools yourself. Okay, so I think that's it. That's just what you want to revise here.